Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Thanks for hanging with us. I have with me Harlan Carvey. He is Senior Incident Responder R&D at Huntress. And Harlan, very, very appreciative for you taking the time to be with us today.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I know that was a fast 15 minutes. But here we go. So we were set up in the previous session. We had Evan from Red Canary delivered insights from their threat detection report that they just issued. And he touched on a few different areas. Initial access was a big one. And so I think that it really teed us up nicely to dive deeper in with this session. And so Harlan, before we really get into this, I wanted to add some context and let folks know how this session kind of came about. And the way that happened was I came across a blog post that you guys did that you were an author on. And I think I can bring that up on my screen here. And here we go, addressing initial access. I mean, I was in the process of building out the agenda for this, and lo and behold, here's a post that speaks directly to what we wanted to cover here. So I was quick to reach out to our friends at Huntress, and they put me in touch with you. Excellent. And that's why we're here talking today. So I wanted to drop the link to this post here in the chat, and wanted to call out a couple of things with this post.
Sure.
I'm not going to scroll through a lot to say people not make them too queasy, but I did want to skip around to a couple of things to help maybe tee you up too. The first is that when folks if you're able to see this on your screen, cool. If you can go to the link and see it at a better resolution for you, please do that. But it would be good to follow along here because there's some really great stuff and some links in this post that are good to have. Mm-hmm. But you'll notice some things that are familiar. If you were here with us for the last session with Red Canary, we're talking about threat actors pivoting away from the macro-based attacks that they were conducting after Microsoft's controls there, and starting to target ISO files, image files, OneNote files. And so I thought this was great that you guys were sharing some updates there in terms of new trends, but then you didn't stop there. You went beyond that, and you got all, I love the way that you framed this. You're talking about disrupting these attacks. What are some things that you can do proactively that'll make things more difficult for attackers? And a lot of times these attacks are just, automated, kind of going out there, just seeing what low-hanging fruit can be caught. And you give some really great actionable advice in terms of settings you can configure and some system hardening steps you can take to really disrupt these attacks and really nip them in the bud, including a script, which really kind of like took it to a whole nother level for me. Oh, yeah. It's rare that I see people going to this level to really make it easier for folks to implement these things. So hats off to you, Harlan.
Okay,
but with that, why don't you talk a little bit about putting this post together and kind of what you were seeing, and maybe as a way to get into that, talk a little bit about your role at Huntress and what you guys have privy to have insight into.
Sure. So again, my name is Harlan Carvey. I'm the Senior Incident Responder as part of the Research and Development Group at Huntress. As of very recently, I think it was as recently as last week after we spoke, it was changed to the Purple Team, because we have a team led by Joe Slowick, who's a threat intelligence guy, and we have myself, who's on the blue side. We have Dave Carter, who's on the red side, and we have some detection and threat hunting capabilities as well. So we've been established as a Purple Team, and so that's kind of the role that I play here. I'm not an actual analyst that monitors the alerts and does the investigations. I take sort of a different approach, and that kind of comes out in what we see here in this blog post. And so kind of kicking off into the blog post, around late October, early November of last year, we started seeing an uptick, at least in our detections, of CACbot infections. And we started to take a look at this, mostly because when I was looking at the shift turnover reports when I come in the morning, I was checking them out in Slack, and I kept seeing CACbot, or different detections that were part of CACbot or led to CACbot, and looking at just references to CACbot and all these reports, and we were just seeing a lot of this stuff come in. And we were doing a really good job of detecting this stuff before it got much further, either through the use of the managed antivirus through Windows Defender or through other means such as the EDR capability that we have within the Huntress agent. And so we were seeing these different attacks come in at different points in the attack cycle. And we started looking at this and thinking to ourselves, well, what could we do to head this stuff off much earlier in the attack cycle? How could we move things closer to the initial point of access? And that's kind of what those actions resulted in this blog post. So another part of the research, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Harlan. I just want to interrupt for a second. Just
Sure.
Folks in the chat comment about CACbot, QBot. You know, there's names of there's some different ones out there. But can you back up and talk a little bit about just for those folks who haven't seen this or haven't been reading much about it?
Okay.
It's been around for a while, right? Can you give a little background on it and what it's doing?
Well, what we'd seen, especially recently, and you know, I won't go into the history because you know we can spend the entire 30 minutes doing that. Sure. But CACbot is malware that's loaded as part of remote access, and usually what we've been seeing towards the end of the year was some sort of initial access achieved through email. You know, through, and we'll talk about some of the various means that we saw, but through some sort of email connectivity, and then either a single or multiple layers of downloaders, ultimately resulting in, you know, as you move along at different points in the attack chain, and this remote access CACbot being installed, and then additional activities being from that point going forward. And we really hadn't been tracking things to the point of, you know, how much of this was initial access brokers versus specific threat actor groups. And in many cases, we weren't able to track the threat actor groups because we were catching it, well, either antivirus, the managed antivirus I mentioned, or as part of our detections, we were catching it and remediating it before the follow-on activities occurred. So we were catching at that point, but primarily we were just seeing this uptick in just these CACbot. And, you know, I know there's different pronunciations or descriptions, QBot. I think there's always been the humorous approach. Is it CACbot? Is it Quackbot? You know,
Yeah.
You know, how do you ask? Is it a GIF or a GIF? You know, it's you know, you kind of break up some of the seriousness with some humor there. But we were seeing this uptick, and we wanted to see what we could do to not only protect our customers, but also take some of the load, take some of the heavy lifting off the analysts. Because when you see an uptick in anything, you know, the question then becomes is, with so much attention going to this, what else are we seeing? What else are we missing? What else isn't necessarily being addressed as best as it possibly can? And we decided to take a look at these CACbot, and I'm not tripping myself up because now I'm thinking Quackbot, QBot, you know, in the back of my head. But no, it's cool. It's cool. But we saw this uptick in CACbot infections, and we wanted to take a look at the different means by which they were getting it. And so we decided to start tracking these from a couple of different perspectives. The perspective that I took was the initial access. And so by working with one of our senior analysts, Dre, who's out of the UK, and he's actually the primary author here. If you scroll back up to the beginning of that blog post, you'll notice the spelling of defense.
No.
Yeah, that's how you tell it came from Dre. Because I put an S and he corrected the spelling to the UK spelling.
Oh yeah, so we've got some product managers who are Brits, and we make fun of we have fun with this all the time.
Yeah, yes, but that's a good indicator. So rather than going back and forth on the spelling and each of us correcting the other, I just like, you know what, we'll just leave it there, and you let everybody know this is evidence that Dre helped put a good bit of work into writing this, not just the content, but also Dre wrote and tested all of the PowerShell scripts, all of them in the blog post, to the point where it's copy paste, which was the goal that one of our goals going forward prior to publication. So basically taking a look at this is the genesis of this blog post, especially with respect to initial access. If everybody thinks back to February 7th, 2022, Microsoft came out with an announcement that they were going to change the default behavior of the Windows operating systems. So basically what they said was, we're going to change the default behavior and now block macros in Microsoft Office documents that are downloaded from the internet. Now, this capability had been available through a registry modification, and originally this script actually used reg.exe to make the necessary modifications, but we needed a little bit more flexibility for some of the modifications to, instead of just one specific user, we wanted to make sure they were applied to all users. So we use PowerShell instead. But the capability to make that change has already been available, but it wasn't being applied by individual customers or individuals, that were managing systems out there. They weren't using GPOs, and it might have been because they weren't aware of it until the announcement came out. But even with the announcement, there was nothing that said, hey, this is something that you could have managed yourself prior to this point. Now, going back, once that announcement was made, we saw a shift after that. Now, it wasn't completely moving away from macros and Office documents, but we started to see an uptick in the number of disk image files, ISO files and .img files that were being sent either directly as an email attachment or in a zipped archive. We started to see more and more of these. And I remember looking at Twitter, just, logging in the morning, and, there were certain Twitter feeds that I followed, and you would see just upticks. And, okay, on any given week, you could go and you could see, instead of all week, macros, you would, in a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet, you'd start to see ISO files and image files. And then we started to see VHD and VHDX files as well after that. And then finally, towards the end of the year, we started to see OneNote files, which is interesting because you would think, well, wait a minute, I installed Microsoft Office. If I block macros in files downloaded from the internet, shouldn't that also include the Office document or the OneNote files as well? Well, apparently it didn't. So towards the end of the year, we started to see an uptick. Now, again, even though we saw an uptick in the ISO files and moving to VHD files, and then we started to see OneNote files being used, we didn't see the use of macros in Word documents or Excel spreadsheets disappearing. It didn't go away. It just wasn't as prevalent, but it was still there. So when we looked at initial access and we were looking at how we could take a big bite out of a lot of these different attacks, not just ransomware attacks, not just CACbot infections. Now, CACbot infections have been associated with, as part of follow-on, with ransomware infections from different variants, and that kind of ties us back to, is it the threat actor group or the affiliate that's using CACbot, or is an affiliate purchasing access to those infrastructures from an initial access broker? Now, with all these questions in mind, we were just thinking, well, what can we do to protect our customers and take some of the volume off of our analysts? And so Dre and I were looking at some of the initial access vectors and different approaches we could take from the front end to either inhibit or completely obviate the attacks. And what we came up with was a series of modifications, ultimately through the registry, that you could set, and these are all directly from Microsoft, that you could set and prevent the infections from the front end. So we've got the ability to block macros in Office documents downloaded from the internet. So that's Word documents and Excel spreadsheets. We've got what you see on the screen was blocking infected OneNote files. And the other thing that we saw was whether the disk image file was included as an attachment, and that's the automatic mounting section, whether the disk image file was included as the attachment itself or in a zipped archive. It didn't matter. What happened is the user would double click on an ISO file or an IMG file or VHDX file, and the default behavior, if you were to right click and look at the context menu that drops down, the default behavior is the verb on top is mount, and it's bolded. And there's a registry setting that you can make, and we provide the script for doing it, that removes that ability. All it does is remove the ability for the user to double click the ISO file and automatically mount it. It can still be accessed programmatically. You can still access disk image files through the disk manager. You can still mount legitimate VHD files through the disk manager. But what it does is it prevents the user from double clicking it, automatically mounting that image file. And the next step is clearly they double click whatever inside the image file. They double click the Windows shortcut or whatever file's inside. Now, there are other issues at play here, and part of the reason we addressed this specifically through the registry setting that's there is that one of the things that we found is that with Office documents downloaded from the internet, for example, those files include what's referred to as a mark of the web or an alternate data stream attached to the file, indicating that they were downloaded from the internet. And this alternate data stream is referred to as mark of the web or by its name, which is a zone identifier, indicating that it came from the internet zone. Now, what we had seen was, and this was a great deal of research going on across the internet about this, was that there were certain archive utilities, the normal ones, 7-zip, things like that, that did not propagate mark of the web into the files contained in the archive. So the original zip that's downloaded from the internet as part of a email attachment would have mark of the web, but the tool used to open the archive did not propagate the mark of the web inside the archive. And therefore the ISO file or the disk image file did not have mark of the web attached, and there were no at the time security controls around that. Microsoft provided an update to that around November, specifically to allow for mark of the web on ISO files or disk image files, and therefore propagating them inside the disk image file itself. Okay, but we still have some issues with different tools. Do they propagate mark of the web or don't they? And so what we did is we took this approach and say, you know what, it doesn't matter. We're going to take the approach of just don't automatically double click and mount this file. And by inhibiting that or obviating that ability, you completely cut off the attack. And it doesn't just have to be CACBOT attack. There are multiple other attacks out there that begin with an email being sent to the user, usually a zipped archive that includes something inside it, whether it's a shortcut file or a disk image file with the shortcut inside it. And so if we simply break that attack chain at the beginning, we realize we're not just protecting the user from CACBOT infections. We're actually protecting the user from other things, other types of infections as well. And so when we were going through and looking at what are the top 3, we didn't want to make an extensive list because it gets very, very difficult to manage and very, very difficult to really remember and understand. And to be quite honest, for presentations like this, it would clearly go on for much longer than half an hour. But we wanted to make it easily digestible. We want to say, look, if you just apply these fixes, and we understood, what that means for a lot of organizations, whether it's an individual, like, those of us sitting at home with our computers at work from home or using our corporate assets, how do we best approach this? And we came up with the idea of not just using the native LOL bins like reg.exe, but actually using PowerShell to be able to manage things like, okay, we have a system with multiple users on it. We want to apply this fix to all users, or we want to apply the fix at the system level. Okay. And so we've included those PowerShell scripts, and Dre's tested them. They're really just nothing more than copy paste. And in fact, I can see on the screen right now, it says run as administrator, copy paste below. Right. It'll make the settings. And you notice that what's on the screen right now, the first command makes modifications for ISO files. And if you actually dig into the registry, files with the extension .img are also identified as ISO files. Okay, and the same thing is true for files with the VHD or VHDX. They're both understood by the Windows operating system to be VHD files. That's the type that they are. And so even though there's 4 file extensions that we're addressing, there's only 2 commands you have to run to make those modifications. And again, it does not remove the ability to access those disk image files. It simply requires that you do so programmatically. Now, when we were researching this, I did talk to some folks online that said that, hey, I have, I have to be able to do this. I have a user, like for instance, in a hospital where X-ray imagery is shared, and maybe a technician has to open an ISO file, and they do so by double clicking. So under those specific circumstances, if they access the file by double clicking and view the image, then you might not want to apply this on that system. Okay, but other systems where where a user does not have a need to double click and automatically mount a disk image file, you might want to remove that capability so they can still do so programmatically, whether it's through the disk manager or some other means. And there's a lot of applications out there that you can use to mount image files, but you want to be able to use that application rather than exposing it automatically and automatically mounting it by double clicking. And that really, really takes a bite out of a lot of the attacks.
I mean, I think that it's something that came up in the last session too, that, there's some of these tactics are used by multiple groups. Obviously, there's nothing that's going to completely keep you safe. It's always whack-a-mole, right? But at the same time, why not take care of the low-hanging fruit this way? It's going to apply to. I mean, you see it reported over and over and over again. It's a very commonly implemented trend, and so why not do it?
Yeah, exactly. Why not take that approach? Why not take the step to reduce your attack surface?
And that's fantastic that you guys went just a step beyond just reporting, here's what we're seeing, to, okay, here's how you can actually mitigate this. And we're going to go to the trouble of testing a script for you.
Yeah. And making it easy. Just copy, paste, and click.
People in the chat are loving it. And we did get some questions. I mean, looking at this, this is something that Ninja, our folks internally, want to be doing more things like this too. And in fact, we have another version of the script that we're baking into to make it even easier for folks, right?
Gotcha.
To make it an out of box script that people can apply with just a click. And so I just love the work that you guys are doing here with this and the direction it's taking. And we want to be going there too.
I hope Ray's watching today, because I'm sure he'd appreciate these comments as well. And if not, I'll make sure to pass them on to him.
No, please do. So we did have a question from Daniel Jenkins. He asked, and this is applying to the auto mounting mitigation. He says, does making it programmatic access only prevent opening them as containers?
I'm not sure I understand the question, because the idea is that the user ends up with an ISO file, either like on the desktop, or it will be on the desktop, but either directly on the desktop as part of an email attachment, which would be in the downloads folder, or as a zipped archive. Okay, and so the idea is to prevent the user from double clicking and automatically mounting it. So in my mind, that would make it a container, but it doesn't prevent the user from using another program. For instance, if they receive a VHD file, it doesn't prevent them from using the disk manager from opening it. However, the disk manager does not have the same functionality as Explorer. Right, so one way or another, it's still a container of some kind.
Right. Well, Daniel, I mean, if that helps, or if you have another follow-up question, definitely let us know. We have a few more minutes here. Harlan, I was wondering, there may be some other points that you want to touch on before we move on. I'd love to maybe end on a note of, when you look at these things and you're getting very, you have a specific target in mind, and you're going down the path of, okay, what's going on here? We're going to trace back all these infections. We're going to look at how they're gaining initial access, and we're really going to target that and say, what can we do as defenders about that? And you're getting very specific to that technique, right? To that tactic. Could you talk a little bit about the overall mindset that you have that goes into this? So it's not, you shared a lot of great, and this is what the blog does too. You shared a lot of very great, very specific advice for this one technique or these series of tactics. But could you talk a little bit about this defender's kind of mindset that you have when you're looking at these things?
So, what we see is, we see these attacks that are going on, and as an MDR like Huntress is, we don't always have the ability to be able to go back and look at these things. Okay, even just today, I was looking at something this morning, and our agent had been installed after the initial access. And we're not able to see how long ago the initial access might have occurred. But when we do have that opportunity to be able to go back and say, okay, we tied this back to, we followed the processes back to this point. Is it a login from another system, or is it because the user was looking at, opening email? Now, in the past, as an incident responder, I've done investigations where, a customer has said, well, this couldn't have been a phishing attack because we have controls. We have an email, we have controls on our Exchange server. We monitor corporate email, but by doing that root cause analysis, by digging in and finding out where this originated from. In some cases, I found out it was because the user accessed their Gmail account and they downloaded the phishing email from there. So the route of ingress didn't go through the Exchange server. But that's how you really get to see the details of control efficacy. What worked, what didn't, how did this get there? And by building out that information, by doing a root cause analysis and by digging in, you're able to say, look, how can we prevent these things from happening again? Because one of the issues that things like insurance don't address is recidivism. Yes, you're transferring risk by having funds available through your insurance carrier to be able to pay out the costs associated with the attack. But what can we do to prevent the attacks from happening in the first place? And how can we do that transparently to the user? And that's really what we're looking to do. Because having something in place that not only obviates attacks but obviates the ability of the user to do critical tasks is pointless. So what we want to do is find those things that we can put in place ahead of time that obviate the attacks but are transparent to the user. So really, when you think about it, how often does somebody, my wife worked for Oracle for 17 years. I think the number of times that she had to mount an ISO file was exactly that. Goose egg. As part of her business. Now, I'm sure she would have said, hey, I've got this weird file that I've never seen before. I don't know what to do with it. What should I do with it? And she's done that before. But really, how many, looking at what you do on a daily basis, how many times do we really share Office documents over the internet? Even going back to my time at other companies with EDR utilities, hey, we have seen where there are organizations out there that do have critical business processes. And so in those cases, where they actually share Excel spreadsheets over the internet or Word documents over the internet, and they include macros, then you might want to look at your process. You might want to find another way of transmitting that information or sharing that information back and forth. Because as you said, Jonathan, these are techniques that are commonly used by threat actors, very commonly used.
Well, it goes to a point in one of our prep calls, kind of mentioned this, about the exception minded approach of, okay, yes, there's always going to be the cases where maybe there is that one particular organization or maybe even a particular user that this could be disruptive to,
Right.
But don't let that stop you from applying a good control that's going to protect the rest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Hey, if you've got one user that you've identified that needs that capability, then don't make that setting on their system, but monitor it. And that'll give you the headspace to actually look at it and say, hey, is there something we can do that we can change this business process, maybe even make it a little easier and a little more efficient, and then we can still apply this protection.
Well, Harlan, thank you so much for coming on and taking time.
No problem, Jonathan. Thank you.
Love what you're doing. Love Huntress. I'm very excited. We didn't rope you into playing Backdoors and Breaches later, but we do have John Hammond. We've got Chandler, and I'm hoping that one of them plays your card.
Hey, if you play my card, you get to wipe all the other cards off the table.
That's how you know that you're the real deal. I mean, this is a pretty powerful card, I gotta say.
I'm gonna say that's actually the case. That's the top card. That's the if you will, if I can, that's the ultimate Sheldon or infinite Sheldon.
Wow.
The infinite Sheldon card right there.
Well, Harlan, I appreciate you spending the time with us. Thank you again for going through the post. And anything else? Just, I guess, the last note, any other resources? Obviously, folks can follow along in the Huntress blog. Anything else that you would point to in terms of additional resources?
Hey, just follow along on our blog overall. I mean, there's a lot of really good information coming out. Follow Dre on Twitter. I think he goes by the handle Purple Fox or something like that. Make sure to follow him. He shares a lot of great information. We've got other analysts, Matthew Brennan. Max shares some really good information. He's in charge of our SOC. We've got a lot of great folks here that are sharing, really putting that information out there to really help not just our own customers, but help others as well. So sharing back with the community, letting folks see what we're seeing, but also sharing our perspective on it as well.
I mean, you guys certainly are forward thinkers in that way and leaders in that way. And you definitely walk the walk. So appreciate you again. For those of you in the chat here, thanks. Cynthia is just saving the day. She's sharing all the links here.
Cool.
We did find out with Zoom, once the session starts, we're not able to add resources. So what we're going to do, I have been adding some things to the chat, but we're going to go tonight. You know, we have day 2 coming up with all of our sessions there. We can add resources to day 2. So we're going to make note of all these things that we're calling out that Harlan shared and that Evan shared before. And we're going to make sure that everybody has their resources in one place, and then we'll be sending out emails too. So we'll make sure everybody can collect things. But Harlan, thank you so much again. Really appreciate it. All right, everybody. Moving right along with our defense workshop series. The next session, we talked about initial access. As Evan pointed out, a lot of times, once there's an initial foothold being made, what are attackers going to do? They're going to look for creds. They're going to do scraping. They're going to see if there's saved credentials they can nab off of LSAS or from browsers. Or backing up even further, you know, they may be gaining access in the first place by compromising accounts. So we're going to talk about in our next session, credential abuse.